Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I commend the expert mechanisms work in relation to advancing the full implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I make the following statement in my capacity as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner on behalf of the Australian Human Rights Commission. My office sits within the Australian Human Rights Commission, Australia's national human rights institution, and therefore ensures the Commission maintains an extensive work program on Indigenous rights at all times. Given that one of my duties is to monitor and promote the exercise and enjoyment of human rights by our peoples, I have made the implementation of the Declaration a priority for the time I will spend in this position. I have done this because action to implement international human rights commitments and obligations, international laws, policies and programs for the benefit of Indigenous peoples remains a challenge in Australia. I believe the Declaration provides a roadmap to address that challenge. However, I believe that businesses alongside governments can also play a core role in breathing life into this instrument in our home nations, and this will be the focus of my statements here today. Engaging with business is a key strategic priority for the Australian Human Rights Commission. It involves encouraging innovation and promoting human rights in order to prevent discrimination and assist with resolving disputes. The Commission is playing a brokering role by providing a safe place for wider engagement between our peoples and the business sector. In the Australian context, the private sector has been quite heavily involved in a number of human rights issues that affect the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This support has primarily occurred across the following areas: the issue of justice reinvestment, the removal of racial discrimination and the recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Australian Constitution, the Racism It Stops With Me campaign, assisting businesses to understand the rights and responsibilities outlined in the Declaration, and reconciliation action plans. Mr. Chair, Justice Reinvestment seeks to address issues relating to the overrepresentation of our peoples within the criminal justice system in Australia. This is one of the most pressing human rights issues faced in our communities and has been raised by numerous organisations and at previous sessions here at MRUP, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and the Universal Periodic Review. Another key way that businesses have demonstrated support for Indigenous human rights in Australia is through the current campaign to recognise us in our Constitution. This Constitution is silent on the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and still contains clauses that allow for discrimination against both Indigenous communities and ethnically diverse populations. I regularly engage with the corporate sector who want to throw their weight behind this issue, whether it's through donations, awareness raising events, promotional materials or in-kind support. The final issue I want to raise is how the Declaration is promoted through business in Australia. In 2013, together with Catherine Hunter, Chair of the UN Global Compact and Corporate Citizenship at KPMG in Australia, I launched a business reference guide to the Declaration. This guide is an important tool that helps business understand, respect and support the rights of our communities by illustrating how these rights are relevant to the activities of business. Beyond this, however, I continue to engage with the Global Compact group through their Indigenous Engagement Working Group, and it's through this group that we are seeing a real commitment to the human rights-based approach within the corporate sector. I've mentioned just a couple of examples of standout organisations who are at the forefront of promoting human rights of our communities here in Australia. However, it is because of this leadership that other businesses are realising the value of a human rights-based approach that not only contributes to our communities, but also makes real business sense as well. Mr. Chair, we therefore recommend that the expert mechanisms on the rights of Indigenous peoples recognise and support the role of national human rights institutions can play in supporting implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Recognise and support the role of national human rights institutions in promoting human rights within the business sector, and urge the states to develop mechanisms with the full engagement of Indigenous peoples that encourage business to implement the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Thank you, Mr. Chair.